Hello, my beloved friend. I'm twin number 3. Thank you so much for listening to the second part of a very quick summary of Genesis 1. This information is very relevant to all of us. It's some of the ancient wisdom that's been left to us. It's intended for all people, regardless of religion. The goal is to explain how the world got to be fouled up. It's a contention of the Bible that we're all here to make the world a better place, to do repair. So it should be helpful to know what we're up against. This is important for all of us. If you're a crystal or indigo child, you probably have a very strong desire to change everything. Crystal and indigo children have a major place in my heart. It's one thing to have a desire to change things, and another thing to know how to do that. If you think you're one of these people, please do PM me. I know a tradition that has the transformation as its goal, and it may be very helpful to you. All of us have to deal with the world that we inherited. So in part 1, I was talking about the 6th day. The pattern of threes failed on that day in 2 different ways. People were made only straight, male and female, and then there should be a 3rd class of beings. That's something to think about. In the world that the fragmented Elohim were making, humans were not intended to be the crown of creation. Now I said that higher deity was not happy with the efforts of the fragmented Elohim and resolved to destroy that world. Part of the problem of that world can be seen in Genesis 1 verse 28, the commandments of these fragmented Elohim. Literally, these directives are reproduce, overdo it, fill up the land, subjugate or exploit it, and tread underfoot other life forms. Now we are the first people who've ever lived who can see what happens if those things are obeyed. The result is planetary death. Ironically, these are the only biblical commandments that humanity as a whole has ever carried out. Problem is, Elohim are not God. If we follow these commandments, we all suffer and die. Fortunately, there is a second way that begins in Genesis chapter 2. There, very different commandments are given by a different divine name. Moses refers to these 2 ways in his summary of the Torah in Deuteronomy. There he says, I set before you death and life. Choose life so that you may live. I'll make videos explaining this second way. But first, let's finish up the 6th day of the fragmented Elohim world. What are these missing 3rd type of beings? Again, Genesis is only an outline. There are other books that have the details. These books tell us that the fragmented Elohim began making a 3rd kind of being. They completed the spirits of these beings, and these beings received those same 5 commandments, reproduce, overdo it, etc. However, before these Elohim could make the bodies for these beings, the Sabbath, Shabbat, began, and all work ceased. Now that by itself tells you that Elohim are not God. Presumably God would plan better than that. But what does Shabbat actually mean? The verb means to cease or to put an end to. Now conventional translations say about the 7th day that God completed the work, and there's a funny phrase, and all their hosts or armies. And then they say that God rested, which of course is absurd. Why would God need to rest? But all of these verbs can and usually are translated much more actively in the Bible. They mean things like utterly destroyed, put an end to, finished off. One of these verbs is used in Genesis 18 in the Sodom and Gomorrah story, where it means utterly destroy. So what exactly happened on the 7th day? Why would Elohim start making a world and then destroy it? Well, remember, not all Elohim are fragmented into male and female. So higher deity sent complete Elohim to stop what the fragmented Elohim were doing. So that's the meaning of Shabbat. However, that left those 3rd class of beings who want to procreate, who want to feed, but they don't have any bodies. What do we call such beings? Well, of course we call them spirits. Our more common term for these particular beings is demon. So we are told that there are spirits, demons, who were meant to be the crown of creation of the fragmented Elohim world. They want to procreate, they want to feed, they don't have any bodies. That leaves us as their nearest cousins. If they're going to do anything, they have to do it through us. And you might expect them to be hostile to us, to resent us. All the more so because in the next beginning, in chapter 2, the initial creation, the glory of creation, is a complete person. So was the world of Genesis 1 a physical world that was destroyed? Could be, although that does not mean that the spirits then would be destroyed. Remember how Genesis begins? There are waters and there are darkness, leftovers from a previously failed world, but there is a spirit of Elohim hovering over the waters. The spirit survived. Another way to look at this is to say that the world of Genesis 1 is on a different plane. Think about how clothing is made. One can pin a paper pattern to cloth and then cut out the cloth according to the pattern. The paper and the cloth are two different planes. They are connected by pins or vortexes, and the pattern seeks to shape the cloth. So one world could try to determine the fate of another world. In fact, a loose meaning of the Greek word daimon, from which we get demon, means something that seeks to distribute fate. The Hebrew word for demon is Dybbuk, which means something that attaches. Now these are not topics that we usually hear much about, yet this is how Genesis starts out to explain how our world got to be fouled up. The next creating is an attempt to fix all of this. Problems arise with that too. Could it be that there really are a lot of spirits that interact with humans? If you're a Christian, that should be pretty simple to answer because Jesus spent an immense amount of time dealing with spirits. There seem to be two groups, those called demons and others called unclean spirits. There is in fact a great deal of modern research into spirit-human interactions. It has a non-religious basis. These researchers are professionals, and to the extent they can with such phenomena, they try to use a scientific approach. I'll put some references in the sidebar in case you're interested. Dion Fortune wrote about one way that a vortex is opened up between what we might call the lower astral plane and our plane here. Perhaps not surprisingly, given the emphasis on procreation in Genesis 1, the way she talks about is sex, opening up a vortex, and allowing spirits to enter our world. In Genesis 2, the next beginning, a complete divine name, YHVH Elohim, makes a single complete being. The concept of complete or whole is very important. The Bible puts tremendous emphasis on the concept of being complete. Here are two quick examples. In a Torah scroll, the characters are all written by hand, and most of them are pretty much the same size. However, one character is written much larger than all the rest. It's the first letter of the Hebrew word for complete. It occurs in a verse that says, "Be complete with YHVH, your God." So in a handwritten scroll, this oversized letter is a way of highlighting and bold-facing. Second example, in the Gospel of Matthew. There are certain well-known things that Jesus actually only said one time, like the Lord's Prayer, love your neighbor as yourself, but 3 times he says variations on that same verse in Deuteronomy, the one with the oversized complete. Unfortunately, this word is translated as perfect in the King James Version. So Jesus did not say, "Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." That would be impossible. Jesus said, "Be complete as your Father in heaven is complete." Of course, by Father, Jesus is referring to YHVH. So, there you have a very quick summary of the first part of Genesis. Its relevance to us: there are 2 paths. One leads to death, one leads to life. It seems overwhelmingly clear that the world is on the first path. How to take the second path is the subject of the rest of Genesis and quite a few of my videos. Thanks, and I hope that was clear.